And my question was simply if anyone wanted to briefly tell us about their experience with podcasts, or if they have none and they're podcast curious.
I think I'll share my conversation with Prof in my breakout. And so she actually has a course which has a collaboration with amongst her students and students from universities internationally. And so one of her assignments is to have the students do a podcast to share about cultural differences. And I think that the topic is in business studies also. So yeah, I think it's an exciting assignment for students to engage in, and particularly it involves students from so many different backgrounds. I think it will be an exciting activity for everyone involved.
Well, yeah, I think that's the greatest promise of podcasts is collapsing distance and difference, but in a meaningful way. Not simply on Zoom, but somehow encouraging the act of listening, which I think is probably pretty radical these days. So I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if you can see it. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we're looking at it.
Okay, great. So I have prepared a short presentation. And in this presentation, I really want to be concrete because everyone has many demands on their time. And so I wanted to kind of briefly give 3 ways in which I incorporate podcasts in my teaching. Before I do so, I should introduce myself and my own history with podcasts. You might recognize the icon in the upper right-hand corner. It is an artifact. It's called an iPod. If you don't recognize it, we might be of different generations. But this was the first way that I engaged with podcasts. And the way that I got into podcasts was when I was an undergraduate 20 years ago in London. And I had a very long commute from Zone 2 all the way to central London. And in this long commute, I couldn't read because I get car sick when I read on the bus. And so I ended up turning to podcasts. And this started my love affair with this medium. And it was particularly important for me because I was going to the LSE, which was a very global and cosmopolitan and kind of glamorous place, at least from my perspective. But I felt very provincial. I felt very much like I came from a place that didn't have so much worldliness. And so when I got to the LSE, listening to podcasts not only helped me pass my commute, but it also helped me broaden my world. And it helped me address a feeling of, not belonging by learning about the world through podcasts. And so this to me kind of became a lifeline for my university years and then subsequently. And so from this inauspicious beginning, I then also became very connected to the idea of listening to people and listening to people tell their stories. And this is something that we never do enough, but also it's something that became part of my professional background. So I'm a historian of Africa, of West Africa, and a great deal of African history is often to engage in oral history, which is speaking to people, recalling their stories, being able to commit their histories to paper. Because in African history, even more so than other places in the world, the record is almost exclusively held by the colonial records. And if they're not explicitly colonial records, they're records that are deeply infused with distorted ideas about Africa and Africans. And so it's very important in African history to talk to people and not simply to take for a fact what people tell you, but to collect narratives and to collect testimonies and to begin to see a story that emerges that runs parallel to and often challenges and contradicts the record that comes out of the colonial administration, or maybe later the Western social scientists. And so here's an image of me conducting some research, speaking with some school teachers in Eastern Ghana in 5 or 6 years ago now. And so oral history and podcasts to me kind of fuse in the same interest that I have of hearing from others in their words in order to expand my horizons. And so today in this presentation, I wanted to outline 3 ways that I use podcasts in my teaching. And I'm interested to hear, like the example that JY just shared earlier, what other ways there are to include podcasts in teaching. So the first way I think is probably the most established, which is as a curricular supplement. The second is as intellectual and network development, which helps me become a better teacher. And lastly, as a product of student learning. So this is an image of my syllabus for when I was teaching at an American liberal arts college. This was the first page of my syllabus, just to give you a sense of this course. And as you can see and hear, I did not grow up on the African continent. I do not have a family or personal relationship to Africa. It's a professional and intellectual interest. And I think that that's important, but I'm not sure it's sufficient in teaching African history, because African history has been so particularly marginalized and belittled in the academy and outside of the academy as well. And so I wanted to make sure that students understood that I was not positioning myself as expert. I was positioning myself as curious alongside them. And so in this syllabus, I assigned these very short episodes, they're about 5 or 6 minutes, by an African scholar who would distill small pieces of African history into a podcast series that he was making. And what makes this interesting, rather than simply assigning a podcast to listen to, is that he was someone I reached out to. And he and I had pretty in-depth conversations about the telling of African history. And eventually he invited me to speak on his podcast, which was a really fun experience for me. But what I set up the students to understand was that he would be joining our class at the end of the semester through Zoom. And so the students listened to the podcast that he had recorded throughout the semester, complementing their reading, knowing that they were going to talk to the person's voice that they were listening to every week. And I think that that made a difference in terms of the buy-in the students had. And not only were they going to talk to him at the end of the semester about how he perceived African history, what work he was doing with his podcasts, his motivations, etc., but they were also meant to prepare questions for him. So this kind of teeing up this idea of assigning a podcast, but that there's really a person behind it and that that person is available and that we can make that connection, it really helped students gain a dimension of understanding that they couldn't have gotten from the textbook. Hearing the voice, hearing music, hearing this podcaster interview African people, that all was infused in the syllabus, and it was really something that brought a lot of texture to the students' learning. So that's the first way that I've included podcasts in my teaching. The second is also professional. I'm a podcast host for something called the New Books Network. If you are in the sciences, you may not have heard about it, and it's clearly an American project. But the idea is that every time that an academic or a scholarly book is published, it goes into this big database at the New Books Network, and a volunteer group of interviewers like me can ask a publisher for the new book that they're interested in, receive it, read it, and then record an interview with the author to kind of spotlight the book and to to give it some publicity, some air to breathe in a kind of friendly, academic, but not critical way. And this has been really a tremendous resource for my career. Frankly, I've had many opportunities where people have reached out to me simply because they heard a podcast I recorded. It's also a great way for me to meet scholars in my field, particularly senior scholars, because I'm able, when they come out with a new book, to say, I'd love to talk to you about it. And at least humanities have people who nothing we like more than to talk about our research. And so it's really been a wonderful way for me to build my intellectual network, my professional network, and to be exposed to new books and to new ideas in my field. And so how I use this in teaching is in two ways. The first is that when I'm teaching a new class, I look to see if there's any new books that have come out on the topic. And if there have been new books, then I reach out to that person and I request an interview with them. So it gives me the motivation to read new things and then to know that I'm going to talk to the author. And so I have to step my game up. I have to really think through. And it gives me an opportunity to ask questions about the field that I'm not totally clear on or that I want to know more about. At the same time, and this is some of the recent books that I have recorded a podcast for. At the same time, it allows me to not only prepare for new courses and to stay up to date, it also allows me to build relationships with people whom students are interested in speaking with sometimes. So the best example of this is Chinua Achebe. He's passed, but if you've ever heard anything about African literature, you know that Things Fall Apart, that came out in the early 1960s, is the African novel par excellence. It is the post-colonial novel from Africa. And it's really the kind of colonial subject taking this very British literary form and making it a form that speaks to the African experience. And this book is assigned in many, many syllabi all across the world. So most people who are taking an African history class surely have heard of Chinua Achebe. And I had the luck of teaching a new class on women in Africa, which I didn't know much about. And so I went to the New Books Network. I saw that there was this new book that came out, an edited volume on the history of women in Africa. And I saw that it was co-edited by Nwando Achebe and Claire Robertson. And Nwando Achebe is Chinua Achebe's daughter, and she's a historian at the University of Michigan. And so I was able to interview them, record this podcast, prepare for my class, and share this podcast with my students. And then even one better, I was able to invite Nwando Achebe to Zoom into my class. And because she was really delighted that someone had taken an interest in the book and she was such a great speaker. And so I got to introduce my students in my Women in African History class to the daughter of Chinua Achebe. I mean, they were starstruck, and rightly so. And they were able to have this great conversation with her about her work and her experiences. And this was something that totally decentered me and recentered someone else as the authority, as an expert, and really expanded the class, right? Connecting the classroom to the world. And this was only possible because I had reached out to Nwando and I had offered to record this podcast with her. So this was an amazing experience for my students. And it's really something that I can't recommend highly enough. How to bring different voices into your classroom, how to address sometimes the homogenous thinking or the homogenous populations that kind of coalesce in an institution. How do you break that up? And part of that is bringing in different voices. And so the final part, and this is perhaps the part that was the most advertised of this talk, is using a podcast as a student assignment. Now, the last time I did this was before AI, and I have been, or ChatGPT, right? Not before AI. And I've been thinking about how this might affect, how we might change this in an AI landscape. Because there are AI tools that can create written oral products. But I think for the moment, it still holds as a relatively ChatGPT proof assignment, relatively. So this is just to give you a sense of how I conducted the assignment. I'm quite low tech, so this is very, very simple. The first after groups had formed. The first was for students to prepare what I call the prep form. And it looked like this. It was very simple. The students had to tell me what the topic was. They had to give me a provisional title. They have to tell me why they chose the topic, 5 related questions that they would like to research on the topic, and a proposed bibliography with 10 sources and minimum 6 were academic. And this was just a preliminary. Then I met with each group and gave them feedback on their topic. If they wanted to do something that I thought wasn't particularly feasible, we would try to refine, right? As you would do with any student project. But this was just kind of their initial proposal. And this would come, you see here I have a calendar. This would be the 1st of October. And this would be a semester that would go until mid-December. So you can see that this process really started, it took about 2.5 months. Once I'd met with the students and they had submitted their prep form and we had kind of come to a modified version of their topic and their interest, then they submitted to me a proposed interviewee form. And on this form, they identified 2 people who would bring some kind of either expertise or personal experience to the topic. And they would have to outline on this proposed interviewee form who these people were, why they wanted to interview them, and what they thought that this person could bring to their understanding of the topic. And I think this is what makes the podcast format really exciting, is to have students have to go out and contact people in the world and interview them about something that they're interested in. It's nerve-wracking, it's scary, but it really allows students to step beyond kind of their comfort zone. And I think that interviewing people with audio rather than video is a much easier proposition because you don't have to worry about what you look like, and the people who are being interviewed don't have to worry about what they look like. And so it's in that way that pressure is reduced. And since there's so much pressure on young people, especially about what they look like on video, it seems to me that the podcast offers the opportunity to have that intimate, unscripted conversation. And so they record this interview, and that will be part of their podcast. Then they work on a script, which they submit as a draft, and we do a peer review process. And then finally, they record the podcast. They splice in the interview. And often students will also splice in songs or some kind of content from like a YouTube video. Say there's a speech given by, a political leader. And so they can use these kind of additional media sources to make their podcast really come together rather than simply just being them speaking on the microphone, which is not exactly the goal, right? You want them to put together something that could be listened to. And then finally, they write a short reflection paper on the experience. And this helps me to see if someone did more or less work, to really kind of gauge a little bit the involvement of the different group members, even though I've already kind of gotten a sense at that point. And the final aspect of this that I will share is that after I receive the podcast, I listen to it, I evaluate it, and this is the way I evaluate it. This was my rubric. So quality of historical analysis and research, quality of interviews, quality of production, and quality of podcast. As I listen to them and I evaluate them, I then record with a voice note my feedback for them. So they gave me an oral product and I give them an oral product in response. And this actually makes grading rather quick. You do have to listen to the podcasts, which are about 30 minutes. So that takes its time. But then once that's been done, and usually they're quite interesting, once that's been done, then I record a voice note of about 5 to 6 minutes, which I send to students along with the rubric and the point value. And it allows me to mark rather quickly, even with a larger group. So if you're interested in this, I use with my students what used to be called Anchor FM, has now been purchased by Spotify. It's free. It's pretty good. You can put different audio segments together. And also you can host podcasts or audio files on this platform in perpetuity. And so this allows students to be able to say, for example, to an internship or to their parents or to their grandparents that they've done this project, and it allows them to share it with people who are beyond, me, the teacher, right? They can share it with their extended family, and they can also use it professionally. And I've had students come back to me saying, when I went to an interview for my internship, they asked me about this podcast that we had done in your class. So that's kind of a nice added benefit too. And so I've put here a link to my students' podcasts. But I wanted to close by sharing a little bit over a minute, of one of my students' podcasts. This was from 2020. So we were at the height of the pandemic. It was early 2020. And they did a podcast where they looked at a pioneering African scholar called Cheikh Anta Diop. And they included a clip of his speaking from a YouTube video. And then after that, you'll hear the interview that they did with a senior French academic who knew Anta Diop, who was someone who was productive in the 1960s and 1970s. So you'll hear the voice of this French scholar. So I will try to call up this audio file, and I hope that you'll be able to see it. JY, if you can give me a thumbs up, I'm going to press play now. And so this is 1 minute of audio that we'll listen to. You'll hear Ben and Amanda, my two students, speaking. You'll hear the audio, the audio clip from the video of the 1960 interview with this African scholar. And then you'll hear the audio of the interview that Ben and Amanda conducted with a senior French scholar in 2020.
Which Errol calls it, was Diop. Just like American history books typically devote a single chapter to the thousands of years of Native American history prior to colonization, so too was Africa as a continent not seen to have a history, or at least not a history before Europe.
Enter Cheikh Anta Diop, who not only contests this narrative that Black Africa had no relevance or agency in the Wheel of Time, but argued in his first of many books that Europe's civilization owes everything to Black Africa.
Je vous ai dit que les trois premiers ne sont jamais sortis de l'Afrique. Ça veut dire que ni en Europe, ni en Asie, encore moins en Amérique, on ne trouve ces trois premiers spécimens, qui sont le début de l'humanité.
These three specimens, which represent the very beginnings of mankind, cannot be found in Europe, they cannot be found in Asia, and of course cannot be found in America. They never left Africa. The complete set remains in Africa.
I met him, I listened to him. He was a kind of a genius too. He was absolutely extraordinary for his generation because he was part of the very, very few students, African students, who was distinguished. And when I began my study to specialize in African history.
Okay, that was just so you can have a sense. I think what's also important to mention is that was the only English podcast that we had in that class, because there were native English speakers and native French speakers in that class. And so all the other podcasts in that class are in French. And that means also that I think students who speak multiple languages and who have many assignments, maybe where they have to perform in English, it gives them an opportunity, if you as the teacher speak the language, to be able to express themselves or produce academic work in another language. And I think that that's also all to the good, to practice multimodal and multicultural production and reception of knowledge. So that is the presentation that I have prepared for you. I am eager to answer any questions that you might have. I also would be interested in having you go into breakout rooms again for a little bit more time, 5 minutes, 6 minutes or so, and speak to the people in your breakout rooms about any ideas that you might have of using podcasts in your teaching. So I will put you in breakout rooms for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back for any Q&A. people are in breakout rooms. I can't hear you.
So sorry. Yeah,
There was nobody
actually,
in the breakout room.
Oh, that's a shame.
okay. I'm sorry because I'm actually
Okay.
outside, but I would love to
Yeah, sure.
join the session. Maybe would that be a recording of this?
Yes, I think so.
Just a
Yeah.
quick
Okay. So
question.
maybe I'll get it from my colleague.
Yeah, sure, Joseph. Sorry,
Yeah.
unfortunately some people did not pick up
Okay,
the.
it's all right. It happens. How long normally would a podcast last? Because
The student podcast?
Yeah, yes.
I tell them it is. I can give you the exact numbers. But I think their goal is 25 minutes.
Okay. I mean, imagine if you have a whole group of them, marking it would be quite tedious.
Well, if you have, I don't know how large the groups are, right? But if you have three, I've had 3 people do one. I've never had a class that's bigger than 27 that did this.
Okay. All right.
So if you have 3 people doing it, then you listen to it, and then you record an audio. So it's about 40 minutes of marking per podcast.
Uh-huh.
Now, since I would grade an essay otherwise, and then reading an essay and writing comments on an essay would take me more or less the same amount of time, except it would be times all of the students rather than divided by 3.
Especially if they do it individually, but 3 in a group would be ideal.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can build in components so that there's more, work for different people. But if I tell myself, okay, I have 45 minutes, but I'm going to get rid of 3 students, I could never mark 3 papers in 45 minutes.
Okay.
So for me, it's a time saver, but it depends on the field, right?
Yeah, it depends, I'm sure. Yes. Thank you for that.
Thanks for having your video camera on. That was very, very kind of you.
I mean, otherwise you don't know who you're talking to.
Right. No, that's very sweet of you.
Yes. No
Appreciate
worries.
it.
Let's wait for the rest to come back in.
That's right. Yes, and I think that it's always a great thing when you can finish early. It's a radical act to give our time back.
I came in a bit later, but I knew that the question was about our experiences of podcast. And I actually started that when I was doing my PhD overseas. And I listened to a lot of podcasts on research methodology and ethnographic studies. And that was actually quite good. But I got tired if it was longer than 20 minutes. Then you probably would just switch off, because it's a multimedia kind of thing when you don't see videos. But when you read, it's a different experience altogether.
That's right. And I think that, some podcasts, they just go on forever and then it's very uninteresting, right? And so I think part of what I am always emphasizing in my teaching, whether students are producing written work or a podcast, is concision, right? You have to work to whittle down. You have to find out what the essential is, but it takes time to get there.
Yes.
Right. And so that's part of the assignment, is because you quickly realize 25 minutes, if you're speaking not at a very, very fast pace, you can't say that much, right?
Actually, it's not much that you can actually say, but the example was quite interesting because you had a kind of a conversation going on. It's just not one person speaking all the time. Yeah. Right.
And I think that, even just to have students, as a historian, it's really a paradox. You're trying to get young people to think about the past. I mean, it is not youth and the past are not things that technically go together.
Oh no, when they age, they'll understand. Not now.
That's a great thing about being a historian. You only get better with age. It's an amazing thing. You're not a mathematician, right? You don't decline. You just get better and better at the past.
Exactly.
But that's part of what is exciting, is having students kind of go through audio clips or video clips, and then they have to really listen, what is the section that I want to put in my podcast? So they're actually asked to really engage with, and just hearing, the quality of audio from 1962 is a different experience
That's
than
quite
now.
interesting. And you've got that old clip on a podcast, which is not bad. Yeah.
Right. And so it's primary source work in a way too for me, which is great.
Excellent.
Thanks, Joseph. So we've just been chatting. Are there any questions, ideas people want to share, experiences they've had? I'm quite interested to to hear anything that people want to discuss. While people were coming back from breakout rooms, Joseph asked how long are the podcasts that I have students record, and I have them aim for about 25 minutes. And this means that I listen to it for 25 minutes, and when I'm marking these podcasts, I always go on a walk, so at least I get my steps in. So I listen for 25 minutes. I take notes on my iPhone while I'm listening. I then record a voice note that hits the points that I've made in my iPhone while I'm walking to give students feedback. And then I go in with the rubric and I assign points. And so in 45 minutes, I have walked for 35 minutes outside, and I have marked the assignment for 3 students. So that's how I do it. And I try to, when I have this assignment for my semester, I try to do 2 or 3 a day. So that way, because I'm always marking in general, so that way at least I get out of the house, at least I get some fresh air, and I feel virtuous because I am marking and not just listening to my own personal podcasts. Vinay, this question, are students' podcasts published? For the students that I shared that clip with you, I do put, they're up on Spotify and they're there in perpetuity as long as Spotify exists. And this way students can hyperlink them in their CV, for example. It's something that they can, share. It's something that they can use in their building their professional profile. So I do publish them, but I had a consent form that I had students sign in order to do that. I don't do it every year. I talk to the students and we decide whether it's something that they want to do or not.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, since the podcasts are out there and possibly forever, whether you need to include any informed consent, whether NTU has certain regulations in place before these creations can be posted, right, on any outside service.
Well, sure, and I'm sure NTU has some regulation. That's probably very likely, but I always ask them for the consent form after I've listened to them all. Like, I wouldn't publish them not having listened to them, right? So I vet the content in a sense before, I wouldn't want students to set themselves up for failure either by saying something or whatever, and it's maybe not something they want out there. And then we have that conversation with the students, and then we sign the consent form. But I've never done it at NTU, so I don't know what the process would be legally here in terms of consent. I've only done it at an American and a French university, and that was, my consent form satisfied that legal requirement. But it's certainly a conversation, right? Because you can also have students who say, I'm not really comfortable having that out there. And sometimes it's only half the class or something who wants it out there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Paolo.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Elisa. I would like to ask if you have any feedback from the students who have gone through these activities with you, and what are the challenges they face in doing something like that, as well as what is their learning experience like?
Well, it depends, I think, what students' experience is overall. I mean, if they were doing a podcast in all of their classes, it would just become annoying, I'm sure, right? It's because it stands out in a landscape where the rest of their assignments are papers and exams that I think it gives them that it's a special experience. So my experience from students overall, everyone seems to have really enjoyed the experience. And even though it's challenging, all kinds of group work always has its tensions, shall we say. The students have really been excited and usually very proud. And one of the things I like the most about it is when they tell me that they shared it with their parents or they shared it with their family. Because I also think that it's really nice when students can talk to their family about what they're doing. And in a real way, like, here's what I've actually been learning. And a lot of the student podcasts, actually, they pick themes that their parents' experiences speak to, right? And sometimes I've had students where they worked on a topic. So, for example, French schools in Africa. I had a student whose parents went to French schools in Africa and talked about how like the neocolonialism and this kind of thing. And she interviewed one of the former teachers of her father at this French school from the 1970s. And so it helped build that relationship, which was very sweet, right? To have young people care about their own past is not easy. So my feedback was overall very good. I've had the tension that I've had when we've done it, the difficulty that I've had is either, some student doesn't want to pull their weight in the group, but that's kind of universal for group work, which is why I include the reflection form. So I let them know that they're going to have an avenue of redress if they feel that someone really isn't doing work at the level that the other group mates are. And the second tension that I've had is that students can't find an interviewee. And that happens, but actually, and I've had to intervene. Sometimes I have my own professional network that I pull on in order to have students connect to an interviewee. But I really have students start working on that very, very soon in the semester. And so that has really alleviated that problem. Because I want them especially to be able to kind of come up with their own ideas of who to talk to, not rely on me as a generator of ideas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jawai. So we have a question about from Tara about the characteristics about, it's in the chat. What in your experience are the characteristics of a podcast that make it an effective assessment tool? Well, the podcast will have a script that the students submit to me and that I see in a peer review process. So I'm kind of tricking them also into writing, even though they're writing a script, they're not writing an essay. So I'm able to see kind of the flow and the sequence of their writing a little bit. At the same time, they're writing in a different way. And so it helps me to see if they're thinking about the quality of their communication, how they're presenting their ideas, how they're scaffolding their approach to the topic. And also I can see what they've read, right? Because in the script, they have their citations, even if they're not spoken out loud in the written script. And so I can kind of get a sense of how much work is being done and what gaps there are. And then as an assessment tool, we're always assessing different things for different assignments, but one of the things that I'm interested in assessing is students kind of getting into it. It's a very kind of difficult thing to measure, but do you see that they've kind of gotten excited about the interview process, or that they've put in all these different components in the audio in order to make it something interesting and not just, a flat recording? These kinds of things. So I'm able to see kind of the academic rigor, particularly by looking at the script at the peer review stage. But in terms of whether they take ownership of their learning, right? Whether they get invested in their learning, whether they get invested in actually discovering the world outside of their classroom, that's what I can see with the quality of the podcast and their kind of engagement with it. Alvin has a question. If you've come across any research studies that share on the learning gains benefits of podcasts in general with adult learners. So I did some research in the science of teaching and learning, and there's almost nothing on podcasts as a student produced product. There's stuff about using podcasts to listen, to complement, reading, the earlier things I shared, but I haven't seen any studies that have talked about how podcasts can concretely affect student learning when students produce them themselves. So this is unfortunately anecdotal, which is probably not particularly compelling for a group of scientists, but be that as it may. Another thing to keep in mind with the assessment of these podcasts is that students have different learning modalities, and sometimes it's important to have students express their knowledge in themselves in different ways. And I think that this, can help certain students who are done a disservice by the traditional written assignments. And so, it's kind of a give and take. And you imagine that this is part of a more complete curriculum in which students have multiple ways of expressing their knowledge and of demonstrating ownership of their learning. We have one more question here. How do you scaffold the podcast assignment with different components? Could you share how you assess these components besides the podcast? So I can, let's see. I really tend to, the prep form, let me just share this slide so everyone can see it again. These are the components that I have of the assignment. So as you can see, 25 points, which is half of the assignment, 5 for the reflection paper, 5 for the prep form, the interviewee form, and the script. These are essentially, if they get them done on time and they're reasonable, it's clear that there's some effort has been put in. I really don't tend to mark these for, I don't know, how do you say? I don't say whether it's kind of for quality, let's say. As long as it's on time, there's the effort is there, you have what you need to have, I'm happy. This allows me to then, so that means 50% of the points is really just doing the work and doing the work at a standard that we've established in class. At that point, then I'm quite rigorous in my assessment of the podcast, meaning I do not give out a particularly high grade on this often. It really depends. If they really show that they're really invested, then I can give a high grade. But usually I give not a particularly high grade, and that allows the grade to kind of balance out, because I tell them always, this is the first podcast you're doing. You can't be exceptional the first time you do something. And this is really a learning experience for you. And so they go into it kind of having that sense of the buffer of the other 50% of the points, as long as they're on track, etc. But understanding that this is the first time they're doing something, so they're going to be learning and therefore probably not creating a perfect product. And another thing that I've done when you do run this thing multiple times is I have a student who did the podcast from the prior year come into the class, either on Zoom or in person. And that's really good because students are really anxious about doing a podcast when they've never done it before. Understandably, we're always anxious every time we do something we haven't done before. And talking to a student who's gone through the process really, really helps them allay their fears and get advice from a student who's gone through it. And this is something that kind of helps them manage their anxiety about a new type of assignment and get more excited about it. And I should also say that I do not give them any particular training on how to use the app, the Spotify app, for how to put together a podcast. It's all self-studied, really, what they do. And that's part of the learning process as well for them to figure out a new piece of technology.
Is podcasting the sole assessment format that you use, or is there, say, a paper that they have to write, or something else, a quiz, for example?
They have to write a script for the podcast, which they submit to me prior, and I take a look at that, and it goes through a peer review process. But this is only one, this is the summative assessment of the course, right? The rest of the course has other assignments.
Right. Okay.
So, it's not just this. So for example, in this course in particular, they had to write reflection papers or blog post answers to the readings every week. They had to do, I think they had to do, I can't remember now, it's been 2 years since I ran this course, but there were certainly other pieces of work that they did. Oh, they had to do, they had to run a seminar session, emphasis on the oral, right? African history, that was always coming back to that. So the blog post, the idea was they had to respond, listen and read to their classmates. So that kind of listening skill. And then they had to run a seminar discussion based on the reading. So there was also listening and speaking. So all of the kind of assessments went around the skill set of listening and engaging and communicating. And I decentered the kind of analytical essay writing that would be the focus in other history courses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you ran that. Sorry, you mentioned you ran that in at a French college and a college in the US. Are you planning to do the same thing at NTU?
Yeah, I'm planning on doing it in a course that I have. I haven't taught it yet, but I'm teaching a course that's going to be called Undoing Empire. And so I'm interested in having students think through what the end of empire means in different places. And so I think that that's the kind of course where it fits the kind of logic of the course question, which, the course, because when you undo empire, you undo power, you criticize established norms, you try to go against the narrative of the colonial view of the world, right? And so it's almost a kind of a critical stance to produce an oral product rather than a written one sometimes. And so it feeds into the kind of whole ethos of the project, of the course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I will report back.
Good.
Thanks.
So I think we do have one more question in the chat, which is from Corinne. So I think it's...
yes, sorry, I didn't see that. Videocast is a pedagogy of learning. Well, Corinne, my sense is I hate being on video, and I know that our students are different because they have TikTok and all of this. But for me, video is kind of, I think images we're flooding and drowning in images. And I actually think that they distract from content a lot of the time. Images can really pull you in bad directions. And particularly, frankly, for girls and women or people who identify as girls and women, I think there's a lot of pressure on appearance, and video can bring that anxiety forward, I think. So for me, audio is really the format that I think allows people to focus more on the content of the experience rather than the aesthetics. And so that's why that's important to me and why I'm not particularly interested in video.
Okay, just note that it's a minute past 11 and we don't, if there are no further questions, we will officially end today's webinar. Thank you very much, Elisa, for sharing and presenting at our webinar today. We also thank all of you who are here to participate and to join in this webinar session. And we will hang around a little if there are any further questions. But if not, thank you very, very much and have a great week, Friday and weekend ahead.
Yes, have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Guys, I was trying to be radical and finish early, and then we ended up going the full time.
Yes. That's because there's so much meat there. That's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
I was thinking over one of the questions, and that was what does this have over perhaps other forms of more traditional assignments? What affordances of this? And I was thinking the way you designed it was good in that it showcased sort of their thought process and the learning process, which I feel like it's almost like it's breathing and it's alive and it captures the way they think through these concepts through the questions and the dialogues that possibly they put in, even though I understand it's scripted. As opposed to a product that is written to say, here are the things that I have learned, right? This is the process with which I have learned it, which I find to be quite amazing. But I think it's also partly because of the way you have designed the assessment task and the things that you wanted them to do that allowed them to do this.
I mean, it's so one of the biggest challenges I have as a teacher is that students want to be perfect on day one.
Right.
Like that's, I mean, obviously there's other challenges we face, but that students really, the experience of struggling is like, that means that you're bad, that means that something bad happened. And so, I think that that's important when that's one thing I really like about the assignment too, is being able to kind of gradually grow into their ownership of the topic.
Mm-hmm.
And when they have to interview someone, that's when it's not me, it's not the grade. But they have to stand in front of someone and ask them, and that's really.
I like that. I really like
scary.
that a lot. Yeah. I think it does a lot. I'm not thinking, how do I incorporate that into what I do? But that is great.
Sometimes I feel like bad because I'm bothering all the people I know. Like, can you talk to my students for their podcast? But yeah, and I think part of like having the all the assignments that lead up to the final assignment, basically they get 100 on it, right? Like I think that helps them kind of psychologically go through the process without feeling like they're going to be, criticized for stumbling through it. And I hope that helps. And then of course they have to be graded on the final product, but it gives them a cushion so that they feel a little bit more safe to grow.
Right.
I hope.
Yeah.
Danae, when you first introduced the podcast, was there any intent to incorporate digital literacy, digital humanities skills? If not, have you thought about possibly including? I'm very bad at branding, like terrible at branding. And the digital humanities stuff is actually, I could have thought about doing this. I could have branded this better. Great idea. Maybe I'll think about rebranding myself as a digital humanities person after this comment. Great idea. So absolutely no. Terrible at all this kind of stuff. So thanks. I'm now a digital humanities scholar, everyone. I hope we've updated the profile.
Okay, I guess if we have no further questions or comments, we will end today's session. Thank you very much once again, Elisa.